2:37 a.m. The ceiling fan turns in slow, indifferent circles. The room is dark, but your mind is illuminated by 1,000 restless fragments. A sentence you shouldn't have said 3 years ago. An email you haven't sent. A future disaster that hasn't happened but feels inevitable. Your body is tired. Your eyes burn. Yet your mind refuses to surrender. You turn to one side, then the other. The pillow grows warm. The silence grows louder. There is something uniquely unsettling about this hour. During the day, your thoughts are disguised as productivity. They call themselves planning, ambition, responsibility. But at night, stripped of distractions, they reveal their true nature. They are not strategic. They are compulsive. You replay conversations as if you're editing a film that has already premiered. You craft better comebacks. You imagine how someone interpreted your tone. You construct entire courtroom arguments in defense of a moment no one else remembers. And somewhere deep down, you suspect this ritual is pointless. Yet you continue, because thinking feels like control. If you think long enough, hard enough, deeply enough, maybe you can prevent embarrassment. Maybe you can prevent failure. Maybe you can outmaneuver fate itself. The mind whispers that vigilance equals safety. But what if it doesn't? What if the very mechanism you rely on for protection is quietly draining your peace? What if overthinking is not intelligence, but fear wearing the mask of intellect? We tend to romanticize the analytical mind. Society rewards the strategist, the planner, the one who anticipates 10 steps ahead. We are told to think things through, to never stop improving, to optimize every decision. The message is subtle but relentless. More thought equals more power. Yet here you are, exhausted, alert in the dark, haunted by hypotheticals. Why does the brain replay conversations that ended years ago? Why does it simulate disasters that statistically may never occur? Why does it analyze facial expressions, pauses, and punctuation as if decoding an encrypted threat? The truth is uncomfortable. The mind is not designed for peace. It is designed for survival. Thousands of years ago, hypervigilance kept our ancestors alive. The rustle in the bushes could mean a predator. The strange silence in the forest could signal danger. The brain evolved to detect threats, especially the ones that aren't obvious. But in a modern world of abstract risks, social rejection, financial instability, reputation damage, the threat detector never powers down. It simply changes its target. Now the predator is embarrassment. The predator is uncertainty. The predator is a future that refuses to be predicted. So the mind scans. It replays. It anticipates, and slowly, subtly, it begins to consume the very peace it claims to protect. There is a psychological horror in realizing that the prison has no visible bars. The noise is internal. The interrogator and the accused share the same skull. The mind questions you, cross-examines you, projects catastrophic futures, and then demands that you solve them before sunrise. But here is the deeper tension. What if this endless narration is optional? What if there were people, long before self-help industries and productivity gurus, who saw this pattern clearly, who understood that an undisciplined mind can become a tyrant, who warned that imagination, left unchecked, causes more suffering than reality ever could? Ancient philosophers did not worship constant thinking. They trained it. They questioned it. They restrained it, because they recognized something we are only beginning to rediscover. The mind is a powerful servant, but a terrible master. And as you lie there at 2:37 a.m., staring into the dark, one question lingers beneath the noise. What if peace was never about controlling the world, but about controlling the mind that keeps narrating it? Morning eventually comes. The alarm rings. The world resumes its rhythm. You get up, move forward, speak, work, decide. From the outside, nothing seems wrong, but something subtle has shifted. The mind that refused to sleep now follows you into daylight, whispering commentary beneath every interaction. This is where overthinking stops, feeling like a late-night inconvenience, and starts becoming a psychological cage. At first glance, thinking appears harmless. After all, reflection is necessary. It helps us learn from mistakes. It sharpens judgment. It refines character. But there is a line so thin that most people never notice crossing it. The line between reflection and rumination. Reflection is deliberate. It has direction. It asks, what can I learn from this? And then it concludes. Rumination, on the other hand, is circular. It does not seek growth. It seeks certainty. It replays events not to understand them, but to extract reassurance from them. And reassurance is addictive. The brain evolved for threat detection, not happiness. For most of human history, survival depended on anticipating danger before it appeared. The mind became exceptionally skilled at scanning for patterns, predicting outcomes, and imagining worst-case scenarios. A mind that assumed the best often didn't survive long, enough to pass on its optimism. So the brain learned to err on the side of caution. It became biased toward negativity. It fixated on what could go wrong. In a world of predators and natural disasters, this vigilance was adaptive. But in a world of emails, performance reviews, and social media impressions, that same vigilance turns inward. The threat is no longer a lion in the grass. It is the possibility that someone misinterpreted your tone, that you chose the wrong career path, that one mistake will permanently define you. The mind cannot distinguish between a physical threat and a social one with the precision we assume. It reacts to both with similar urgency. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. Stress hormones flood your bloodstream. The body prepares for battle, but there is nothing tangible to fight. This is how thinking becomes a cage. One of the most deceptive forms it takes is analysis paralysis. You face a decision, a job offer, a relationship choice, a life move. Instead of choosing, you simulate every possible future. You calculate probabilities. You imagine regret. You attempt to outmaneuver uncertainty itself. It feels responsible, mature, intelligent. But the more variables you introduce, the more uncertain the outcome becomes. You begin to believe that if you think long enough, you can eliminate risk entirely. Yet risk is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a condition of existence. Then there are cognitive distortions, subtle mental habits that warp perception without announcing themselves. Catastrophizing turns minor setbacks into impending disasters. Mind reading convinces you that others are judging you harshly without evidence. All or nothing thinking frames situations in extremes, success or failure, admiration or rejection. These distortions operate quietly. They disguise themselves as rational analysis, but their function is emotional, not logical. They amplify fear while pretending to manage it. And perhaps the most powerful illusion beneath all of this is the illusion of control. Overthinking convinces you that mental rehearsal equals preparation, that replaying an argument will somehow rewrite it, that imagining failure will prevent it. But most of what we obsess over lies outside our influence. Other people's thoughts, future outcomes, random events. The mind resists this truth. It prefers anxiety over helplessness, because anxiety feels active. Helplessness feels passive. So you replay the conversation. You reconstruct the meeting. You draft the speech in your head 100 times. You imagine how you were perceived. You analyze every pause, every expression, every shift in tone. And with each loop, the emotional intensity grows. Ironically, the more you think, the less clear you become. Overthinking creates a false sense of preparedness. It tells you that you are bracing for impact. But in reality, you are reinforcing fear pathways in the brain. Each repetition strengthens the association between uncertainty and danger. The cage tightens not because of the world, but because of interpretation. What makes this especially tragic is how socially reinforced it is. The culture praises busyness of mind. It rewards constant strategizing. It equates worry with responsibility. If you are not anxious about your future, you must not care enough. But beneath the productivity slogans and motivational speeches, a quieter truth persists. Endless thought does not guarantee clarity. It often guarantees exhaustion. And yet, this pattern is not new. Long before digital notifications and performance metrics, humans wrestled with the same restless mind. The technology has changed. The stimuli have multiplied. But the internal mechanism remains ancient, which raises a profound possibility. If this problem has existed for thousands of years, perhaps the solution does not lie in another productivity hack or optimization strategy. Perhaps it lies in something older, something disciplined, something that understood the mind not as an unquestionable authority, but as something to be trained. The cage was built slowly, but its design has been studied before, long before modern psychology gave names to rumination and cognitive distortion, before neuroscience mapped anxiety loops in the brain. A group of thinkers stood in the heart of an empire and quietly diagnosed the same disease. They did not call it overthinking. They called it the mismanagement of judgment. In the chaos of ancient Rome, surrounded by political intrigue, war, betrayal, and public spectacle, the Stoics observed something unsettling. External turmoil was inevitable. Internal turmoil was optional. One of the most powerful men in the world understood this intimately. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire stretching across continents. He commanded armies, faced plagues, navigated corruption, and carried the weight of millions of lives. If anyone had justification for anxiety, it was him. Yet at night, alone, he wrote private notes to himself. These writings were never meant for publication. They were reminders, corrections, self-discipline in ink. Centuries later, they were compiled into a book now known as Meditations. What makes these pages extraordinary is not their elegance, but their vulnerability. The Emperor of Rome repeatedly warned himself not to be disturbed by insult, not to be angered by incompetence, not to fear death, not to crave approval. This was not a man free from intrusive thoughts. This was a man actively training against them. He understood something radical. The mind generates impressions automatically, but whether those impressions become suffering depends on judgment. Around the same period, another Stoic voice spoke with sharp clarity. Seneca, a statesman and advisor to emperors, wrote words that still cut through modern anxiety. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. This was not poetic exaggeration. It was psychological precision. Seneca observed how the mind rehearses disasters before they arrive, how it magnifies possibilities into inevitabilities, how it confuses anticipation with experience. In doing so, it forces the body to endure pain twice, once in imagination, and once in reality, if the event even occurs to the Stoics. This was wasteful, irrational, self-inflicted. But they did not propose eliminating thought. They were not advocating emotional numbness or intellectual passivity. Stoicism was not about silencing the mind. It was about disciplining it. The clearest articulation of this discipline came from a former slave turned philosopher, Epictetus. Epictetus taught that human distress does not arise from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. A delayed response to a message is neutral. The story you attach to it. They're ignoring me. I've offended them. I'm being rejected is what generates anxiety. An insult is merely sound waves. The meaning assigned to it determines whether it wounds. This distinction seems simple, almost obvious, but it is revolutionary. If events do not inherently disturb us, then the battlefield shifts. The problem is not the world. It is interpretation. The Stoics divided reality into two categories: what is within our control and what is not. Within our control lie our judgments, intentions, and actions. Outside our control lie other people's opinions, external outcomes, chance, illness, death. Overthinking thrives on confusing these categories. We replay conversations to control how we were perceived. We obsess over future scenarios to control outcomes that have not yet unfolded. We catastrophize about randomness as if sheer mental effort can negotiate with probability. The Stoics would call this a misallocation of energy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Seneca cautioned against projecting suffering into the future. Epictetus insisted that freedom begins when you stop demanding that reality conform to your preferences. This was not suppression. It was training. Imagine a soldier preparing for battle. He does not curse the existence of enemies. He sharpens his discipline. He trains reflexes. He studies his reactions. The Stoics treated the mind the same way, not as an enemy to destroy, but as a force to condition. They practiced negative visualization, imagining loss not to dwell in fear, but to reduce its shock. They journaled not to indulge emotion, but to correct flawed thinking. They exposed themselves to discomfort voluntarily to weaken the grip of anxiety. In essence, they built psychological immunity. What is striking is how modern their insights feel. Replace public insult in the forum with criticism. Online. Replace exile with career instability. Replace plague with global uncertainty. The emotional mechanisms remain unchanged. Stoics did not promise a painless life. They promised resilience. They accepted that the world would remain unpredictable, often unjust, but they refused to let their internal world mirror that chaos. Peace to them was not accidental. It was practiced daily, deliberately, almost stubbornly, and perhaps this is the most confronting realization of all. If even an emperor had to wrestle his own thoughts onto the page, if even a philosopher born into slavery could claim inner freedom, then the restless mind is not a personal defect. It is a universal human condition, but so is the capacity to train it. The question is no longer whether the mind produces noise. It always will. The real question is whether you will believe everything it says, or whether you will learn to examine it before it shapes your peace. The Stoics trained in public squares and private chambers, wrestling with their own judgments in a world of war and political instability. But they faced one advantage we no longer have. Their distractions eventually went silent. Ours never do. The modern world does not merely tolerate your mental noise, it cultivates it. What was once an internal struggle has become an external industry. The restless mind is no longer just a byproduct of evolution. It is a resource. It is measurable. It is monetized. Social media platforms do not operate on calm reflection. They operate on engagement. And engagement thrives on emotional activation. The algorithm does not reward peace. It rewards reaction. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Fear travels quicker than context. Comparison lingers longer than gratitude. Every scroll introduces unresolved stimuli. A headline that hints at catastrophe but requires another click for clarity. A curated image that subtly questions your own adequacy. A debate designed not to inform, but to provoke. Your mind encounters these fragments and does what it evolved to do. It tries to resolve them. It searches for closure. It seeks certainty. But the feed is infinite. Resolution never arrives. The mind keeps scanning. This is not accidental. Attention has become currency. The longer you think about something, the longer you remain engaged with it. The more emotionally charged the content, the more likely you are to return. Overthinking becomes profitable. 20-4-hour news cycles amplify this effect. A single event is dissected from every possible angle, replayed with dramatic language, framed as urgent and unprecedented. Even when the facts are stable, the narrative is not. It evolves hourly. Speculation fills the gaps where certainty is absent. The mind interprets this constant stream as instability, and instability demands vigilance. You begin to anticipate crises that have not yet occurred. You rehearse arguments about issues you cannot directly influence. You internalize a global scale of responsibility while possessing only individual control. Then there is productivity culture, the quieter but equally potent force. It whispers that rest is laziness, that stillness is wasted potential, that every moment must be optimized. If you are not thinking about your next move, someone else is. If you are not planning 5 years ahead, you are already behind in such an environment. Overthinking masquerades as ambition. You analyze every decision because the stakes feel amplified. You fear missing opportunities because scarcity is emphasized. You compare your timeline to others because success is constantly displayed. Rarely contextualized. The result is a mind that never disengages. Ancient Rome understood spectacle as a tool of control. Public games, dramatic speeches, and theatrical displays kept citizens emotionally invested and distracted. Political power often relied on directing collective attention toward grand narratives rather than structural realities. Today's digital landscape operates differently in form but similarly in function. The spectacle is personalized. Instead of a single arena, there are millions of curated feeds. Instead of one emperor addressing the crowd, there are influencers, commentators, and institutions competing for cognitive real estate. This is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. It is an economic structure. Platforms are incentivized to maximize engagement. Media outlets are incentivized to capture attention. Corporations are incentivized to sustain desire, and the human mind, wired for threat detection and social comparison, responds predictably. Overthinking, in this context, is no longer merely a private flaw. It is socially amplified. The environment constantly introduces unfinished narratives. It keeps problems visible but solutions distant. It encourages reaction over reflection. You are told to stay informed, to stay connected, to stay competitive. But rarely are you told to disengage. And yet, disengagement is precisely what threatens the system. A calm mind scrolls less. A grounded person reacts less impulsively. Someone who has separated what they can control from what they cannot is harder to manipulate through fear. This realization shifts the responsibility without erasing it. Yes, the mind generates its own noise, but the volume is not set in isolation. The culture adjusts the dial. The question then becomes uncomfortable. If the environment is engineered to stimulate your vigilance, if outrage, comparison, and fear are profitable, if your attention is a commodity traded invisibly every day, what does it mean to reclaim silence? It means resisting stimuli designed to provoke. It means questioning narratives that demand immediate emotional investment. It means choosing deliberate thought over compulsive reaction. In a world that benefits from your agitation, peace is not passive. It is defiant, and perhaps that is why cultivating it feels so unnatural. Because when the system thrives on your mental noise, quieting it becomes an act of quiet rebellion. At the center of overthinking lies a quiet, almost invisible assumption. If you think hard enough, you can control what happens next. This assumption rarely announces itself directly. It disguises itself as responsibility, as preparation, as intelligence, but beneath the surface, it carries a deeper fear, the fear of uncertainty. The Stoics approached this fear with ruthless clarity. They divided existence into two categories: what is within your control and what is not. It sounds simple, almost obvious, yet most mental suffering comes from confusing the two. Within your control are your judgments, your intentions, your actions. Outside your control are other people's opinions, external outcomes, chance events, the passage of time, even the final results of your own efforts. Overthinking thrives precisely where control ends. You replay a conversation in your head, adjusting your tone, refining your words, imagining how you should have responded. The moment is gone. The other person has moved on, but your mind remains in negotiation, as if the past is still editable. Why? Because admitting that the interaction is finished, and that its interpretation now lives in someone else's mind, feels intolerable. So you mentally reconstruct it. You craft better responses. You simulate alternative versions of yourself. It gives the illusion that the outcome is still fluid. Or consider the quiet dread before sending a message. You predict rejection before it occurs. You imagine silence as confirmation of your worst fears. You analyze typing indicators and response delays like coded signals. The mind is not seeking truth in these moments. It is seeking certainty, and certainty, in a world shaped by other people's autonomy, is rarely available. Career decisions reveal this pattern even more starkly. You stand at a crossroads. Two paths, neither guaranteed. You create spreadsheets. You analyze risk. You consult opinions. And still, the anxiety lingers. Because the discomfort is not about information. It is about surrendering the fantasy that the perfect choice exists. Overthinking promises that if you examine every variable, you can eliminate regret entirely. But regret is not eliminated by calculation. It is reduced by commitment. Here lies the psychological reward of overthinking. It feels like action. When you think intensely about a problem, your body responds as if you are doing something. Your heart rate shifts. Your attention narrows. There is a sensation of engagement. Passivity transforms into internal activity. But internal activity is not the same as external influence. The Stoics recognized this trap centuries ago. They observed that people exhaust themselves wrestling with variables beyond their reach. They attempt to control weather, reputation, politics, mortality, all through thought. This is why the dichotomy of control was not merely philosophical theory. It was liberation. If something lies outside your control, no amount of mental rehearsal will command it. Other people will still form their own judgments. The future will still unfold unpredictably. Randomness will still interrupt carefully constructed plans, and yet, this is where most mental energy is spent. The turning point arrives when you confront a disquieting truth. You do not control outcomes. You control responses. You cannot dictate whether someone respects you, but you can choose whether their disrespect defines your self. You cannot guarantee success, but you can decide whether effort aligns with your values. You cannot prevent uncertainty, but you can train yourself to tolerate it without collapsing into panic. This shift feels unsettling at first. It removes the illusion that relentless thought can shield you from chaos. It demands humility. It asks you to accept vulnerability, but it also restores power in a precise location. When you stop trying to dominate what lies beyond your reach, attention returns to what remains. Your judgments, your intentions, your actions in the present moment. The mind resists this transition because it prefers control to acceptance. Control feels strong. Acceptance feels passive. Yet Stoic discipline reframes acceptance not as surrender, but as strategic clarity. Imagine carrying a heavy weight that does nothing to move you forward. Overthinking about others' opinions, future uncertainties, uncontrollable variables. These are weights. Setting them down does not make you weak. It makes you mobile. The philosophical turning point is not dramatic. It is subtle. You begin noticing when your thoughts wander into territory you cannot influence. You begin asking, is this within my control? If not, you withdraw your energy, not in indifference, but in precision. Gradually, the mind learns a new pattern. Instead of spiraling outward into endless hypotheticals, it turns inward toward disciplined response. This does not eliminate uncertainty. It repositions you within it. The world remains unpredictable. Outcomes remain uncertain. But the internal struggle shifts. The battlefield narrows. And within that narrower field, your judgments, your choices, your character, peace, becomes possible. Not because the world obeys you, but because you have stopped demanding that it must. Once you understand that, the mind is not automatically your ally. A new question emerges. How do you train it without becoming its enemy? The Stoics did not rely on vague optimism or motivational slogans. They developed practices, deliberate exercises designed to strengthen judgment the way physical training strengthens muscle. This was not self-help. It was mental conditioning. One of their most misunderstood tools was negative visualization, known as premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. At first glance, it sounds counterproductive. Why imagine loss, failure, or hardship when the mind already leans toward anxiety. But the intention was precise. Instead of unconsciously catastrophizing in the middle of the night, the Stoic chose to confront possibility deliberately in controlled conditions. You imagine losing the job. You imagine public criticism. You imagine plans collapsing. Not to panic, but to ask calmly, if this happens, what remains within my control? The effect is paradoxical. When you voluntarily face feared outcomes, they shrink. The unknown becomes articulated. The catastrophic becomes survivable. You realize that even in loss, your character, your choices, your response remain yours. Rumination feeds on avoidance. Negative visualization interrupts it by replacing vague dread with structured reflection. The mind learns that fear can be examined without being obeyed. Then there is journaling, not as performance, but as confrontation, when Marcus Aurelius wrote what would later be compiled into Meditations. He was not crafting philosophy for applause. He was correcting himself. He reminded himself not to crave validation, not to resent incompetence, not to fear death. Over and over again. Writing slows thought. It exposes contradictions. A fear that feels overwhelming in the abstract often appears exaggerated when translated into sentences. The page becomes a mirror that does not flatter. Journaling interrupts rumination because it transforms looping thought into linear language. Instead of circling endlessly around a worry, you articulate it once. You challenge it. You respond to it. The mind, having been heard, gradually loosens its grip. Cognitive reframing operates in a similar spirit. It is the deliberate examination of the stories attached to events. When something goes wrong, the first interpretation is rarely neutral. It often leans towards self-criticism or catastrophe. Reframing asks, what else could this mean? Is this truly humiliation or simply discomfort? Is this rejection or redirection? Is this failure or feedback? This is not blind positivity. It is disciplined skepticism toward your own assumptions. The Stoics understood that impressions arrive automatically. You cannot prevent the initial emotional surge, but you can pause before endorsing it. That pause is everything. Between stimulus and response lies a fraction of a second where awareness can intervene. Most people surrender that space unconsciously. An insult triggers anger. A delay triggers anxiety. A setback triggers despair. Training the mind means expanding that space. You feel the surge, but you do not immediately agree with it. You observe the thought instead of merging with it. You ask whether it belongs to what you can control. If not, you release it. If yes, you act. This pause feels subtle at first, almost artificial. But with repetition, it becomes instinct. Another Stoic practice was voluntary discomfort. Cold baths, simple meals, periodic exposure to inconvenience. To modern ears, this may sound ascetic, but its psychological purpose was sharp. By willingly experiencing minor hardship, the mind becomes less terrified of it. Comfort loses its tyranny. You learn that you can endure more than you imagined. When unexpected difficulty arrives, it feels familiar rather than catastrophic. Overthinking often magnifies discomfort because it assumes fragility. Voluntary discomfort proves resilience. Imagine choosing to sit with silence instead of reaching for distraction. Choosing to delay gratification. Choosing to confront a difficult conversation directly rather than rehearsing it for days. Each act strengthens internal authority. Gradually, The relationship with thought changes. The late-night spiral loses intensity because you have faced worse imaginings intentionally. The replayed conversation loses urgency because you have trained yourself to distinguish between what is editable and what is finished. The fear of uncertainty weakens because you have practiced surviving it. Discipline, in this context, is not rigidity. It is freedom from compulsion. The untrained mind reacts automatically. The trained mind responds deliberately. The difference is invisible externally, but transformative internally. There is a quiet dignity in this process. No applause. No external recognition. It is private work, like the emperor writing reminders to himself in the dark. You confront your own tendencies without audience, and slowly something shifts. You notice thoughts arise without immediately believing them. You experience anxiety without assuming it predicts reality. You make decisions without demanding perfect certainty. The mind still produces noise, but it no longer commands unquestioned obedience. This is what the Stoics meant by inner freedom. Freedom is not the absence of challenge. It is mastery of response. It is the ability to walk through uncertainty without negotiating endlessly with fear. It is the recognition that peace does not depend on perfect circumstances, but on disciplined interpretation. Training the mind like a warrior does not eliminate vulnerability. It sharpens resilience. It does not silence thought entirely. It teaches thought its proper place. And when discipline becomes habit, something remarkable happens. The cage begins to open. Not because the world has grown quieter, but because you have. The modern individual is restless. Even in moments of stillness, there is motion beneath the surface. Notifications flicker. Headlines circulate. Opinions collide. The mind absorbs it all, sorting, judging, reacting. To live today is to exist in a state of near-constant cognitive stimulation. And because this stimulation is normalized, restlessness feels ordinary. But ordinary does not mean healthy. Contrast this with the Stoic archetype. Not a detached mystic, not an emotionless statue, but a person anchored within themselves. Surrounded by chaos, yet not consumed by it. Exposed to insult, yet not defined by it. Facing uncertainty, yet not paralyzed by it. The difference is not intelligence. It is regulation. Peace, in this sense, is often misunderstood. Many assume that a calm mind is indifferent, disengaged, passive. That to remain steady in turbulence is to lack passion. But Stoic peace was never apathy. It was selective engagement. The restless mind reacts to everything. Every comment demands interpretation. Every event demands emotional investment. Every possibility demands simulation. There is no filter, only reaction. The quiet mind chooses it, asks, does this deserve my attention? Is this within my control? Is this aligned with my values? If the answer is no, it withdraws, not in denial, but in discipline. Emotional stability is not the absence of feeling. It is the capacity to feel without being commandeered. When anger arises, it is examined before it becomes action. When fear surfaces, it is assessed before it becomes identity. When praise appears, it is appreciated without becoming dependency. This stability enhances clarity. Decisions made from panic often seek immediate relief rather than long-term alignment. Decisions made from calm evaluation consider principle over impulse. In a world of rapid reactions, the ability to pause is rare and therefore powerful. Resilience grows from this foundation. A mind accustomed to chaos collapses when challenged. A mind accustomed to deliberate response adapts. Setbacks are processed without spiraling into criticism is evaluated without dissolving into defensiveness. Uncertainty is tolerated without catastrophic projection. The absence of mental noise creates space. When you are not replaying yesterday or rehearsing tomorrow, attention returns to the present. You notice nuance. You recognize opportunity. Creativity surfaces not from frantic thinking, but from mental room to breathe. Purpose requires clarity. If your cognitive energy is consumed by imagined threats and endless comparison, there is little left for intentional direction. But when the internal chatter softens, values become audible. What matters stands out against silence. The quiet mind is not empty. It is ordered. It understands that not every thought deserves belief, that not every stimulus requires response, that not every problem belongs to you. There is a subtle authority in this stance. You are no longer pulled by every emotional current. You choose where to stand. You decide when to engage and when to disengage. The world may remain loud, but your participation in its noise becomes voluntary. This is strength in its quietest form. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It does not react impulsively to prove presence. It operates with measured intention. In many ways, this composure is countercultural. Reactivity is often mistaken for authenticity. Outrage is mistaken for moral clarity. Constant expression is mistaken for depth. But depth often resides in restraint. To cultivate a quiet mind in a noisy world is to reclaim sovereignty. You are no longer a reflex. You are an agent, and from that agency, something transformative emerges. You begin to live deliberately rather than defensively. Decisions reflect principle rather than fear. Energy flows toward what you can build, rather than what you cannot control. The restless modern individual chases stability through endless thought. The Stoic archetype builds stability through disciplined response. One is perpetually bracing, the other is grounded, and in that grounding, peace reveals its true nature, not as weakness, not as withdrawal, but as strength refined by intention. 2:37 a.m. returns. The ceiling fan still turns. The room is still dark. The world is still uncertain. Nothing external has changed. And yet, something fundamental is different. The thoughts arrive, as they always have. A memory surfaces. A future scenario unfolds. A quiet anxiety whispers its familiar warnings. The mind does what minds do. It generates. But now there is space. The thoughts are present, yet they are no longer indistinguishable from you. They move across awareness like weather across the sky. Noticeable, sometimes intense, but not definitive. This is the final realization, the one that shifts everything. You are not your thoughts. For most of your life, this distinction was blurred. A thought appeared, and you assumed it was truth. A fear emerged, and you treated it as prophecy. A self-critical narrative surfaced, and you mistook it for identity. I am anxious. I am a failure. I am behind. But these statements are not facts. They are interpretations, momentary cognitive events. The Stoics understood this intuitively. They did not possess modern language about neural pathways or cognitive fusion. Yet they grasped the essence. Impressions are not commands. Between the arrival of a thought and the endorsement of it lies choice. Identity is not constructed from every passing mental image. It is shaped by which ones you consent to believe. When you separate awareness from narration, a subtle but profound freedom appears. The mind may still simulate rejection, but you no longer collapse into it. The mind may still replay a conversation, but you recognize it as rehearsal, not reality. The mind may still predict catastrophe, but you examine the prediction before accepting its authority. You become the observer. This does not mean detachment from life. It means clarity within it. You experience thought without drowning in it. You witness emotion without being consumed by it. You recognize that consciousness is the stage upon which thoughts perform, but you are not the performance itself. At 2:37 a.m., this understanding feels revolutionary. The ceiling fan turns. The darkness lingers. But instead of wrestling every narrative into submission, you allow them to rise and fall. You question whether they belong to what you can control. If they do not, you release them gently. Peace does not arrive as silence. It arrives as non-attachment. The modern world will continue to provoke. Headlines will circulate. Opinions will clash. Uncertainty will persist. Your brain will continue scanning for threats, projecting possibilities, replaying memories. That mechanism will not disappear, but your relationship to it can change. You are not the sum of intrusive loops. You are not the echo of past conversations. You are not the catastrophe your imagination constructs at midnight. You are the one who notices. And once you recognize that, the tyranny weakens. The mind becomes a tool again. Powerful, analytical, creative, but no longer sovereign. You decide which thoughts deserve cultivation and which deserve dismissal. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of compulsively rehearsing. This is the quiet victory the Stoics pointed toward, not the eradication of thinking, but the mastery of allegiance. Not the destruction of imagination, but the discipline of judgment. The room remains dark. The world remains complex. Your mind remains active, but you remain steady. And in that steadiness, a final truth settles in. Peace was never the absence of thought. It was the refusal to let thought rule you.